Thanks. I owe Manuel and my Spanish colleagues a huge debt, I have to say. I began as an English historian, and then I switched to Anglo-Dutch history in my early 30s. And in my early 40s, when I came to Madrid, I went to Simancas, different places, and I suddenly realized, it's obvious to you, but it's not when you come from the north, that yes, the Low Countries was a Spanish province, and so if you say Spanish province, you have to work in the Spanish archives. And funny enough, when writing about William III, for example, which I'm doing, nobody has used Spanish archives to write the life of William III. So I'm not sure the biography will be good, but for sure it will be the first one to use to make an extensive use of Spanish archives, and for this I owe a great debt to the man sitting on my left. So I've actually, so the original plan was to write only about William III, but I have a surprise for you. According to the number of minutes I need to tell you the main story, because we have a distinguished colleague after me, and there's nothing worse than colleagues who blabber on forever, so I'll make sure that Manuel has an eye on the watch, and we'll make sure there's an equal and equitable space for the two of us. This is really an untold story. It's the story of an enclave, la Principauté d'Orange, the Principality of Orange. And let me explain how and why I want to do this. How and why? Well, basically what I want to do, and a lot of historians do now, but depending on the topic, I want to decenter our knowledge of the history of the Orange family, and decenter the history of the Dutch Republic. B, I want to reconnect regional and international history, and thereby correct two mistakes. Number one, the historiography of the Principality is, by and large, is a piece of local history, of microhistory. And the history of the Orange family is very much, since the 19th century, a piece of national history. So it's a case of microhistory in global European context, with, I'm afraid, no imperial ramifications, but there is, I hope you'll like that, there is a connection with Spanish history. So I just want to locate briefly Orange on a map of now a department, a département called Vaucluse, and remind you that the distance between Orange and The Hague in the time I'm studying, the 17th century, was about 3 weeks by horse. So it's a long, long trip, which only a few members of the Principality would embark on. Here's a map by Jacques de Chiers. I'll come back to this distinguished noble family for a reason you'll understand. There's a Spanish connection, with a map of the Principality of Orange in 1627. The Principality is circled in blue, the city of Orange in yellow. There's a neighboring papal state, Côte Renaissance, since the Middle Ages, 1274. Louis XIV, the enemy of William III, unsuccessfully sought to annex Côte Renaissance throughout his reign. The city of Orange, we're talking about 3,000 inhabitants, roughly the same size as a small town in the province of Holland, Edam. The Principality, that is the city, its main city, included a parliament, that is a court of justice, a university, and printers. And other key cities in the Principality were Courtisan and Gigondas, all to be visited. It's very pretty if you like traveling in France. It's a lovely place. Here's the same map in black and white, all taken from Gallican. And this is a map of 1620 dedicated to Prince Maurits, who was stadtholder between 1585 and 1625, behind the fortification of the city of Orange in the early 1620s. And that was one of the main problems in relation to France. France, as early as the 1620s, was nervous about the Principality of Orange, and particularly the fortification of the Principality of Orange. The forts, the fortifications, were destroyed by Louis XIV when he marched into the city in 1660, and remain a bone of contention between France and the Netherlands and the Principality throughout his reign. Maurits only became sovereign in 1618 after the death of his half-brother Philip William the Catholic son of William the Silent and Anna von Buren. And Maritz was visited the Principality in 1619 on behalf of his half-brother. He was the only Prince of Orange in the history of the Principality to have paid a visit to the Principality. It was a Protestant-dominated bi-confessional enclave, so there was a mix of Protestants and Catholics, but a majority of Protestants. And it was governed, as of 1607, by an edict of tolerance that was modelled after the Edict of Nantes of 1598. So you wouldn't be surprised to know, if you don't know already, that one of the results, the outcomes of the revocation of the Edict of Nantes of 1685 was the invasion of the Principality of Orange and its reoccupation by French troops. So now what I want to do is run you through the people, in a sense, who made the history of the Principality. So he's a very important figure in the history of the Orange family. It's through him that the Oranges inherited the Principality. He died in Saint-Dizier in 1544, and so it is his cousin, William of Nassau-Dillenburg, who inherited the Principality, hence William of Orange-Nassau. So the Oranges, I want to say, were very keen to stress the continuity, the dynastic continuity with the Château branch. I'll be giving you other examples. So typically the grand funeral of Philibert, his uncle, served as a template for the funerals of all the princes of Orange after William the Silent. What I want to do is not run you through the stadtholders one by one, but insist on the fact that minting currency was one of the hallmarks of sovereignty, the sovereignty of the princes of Orange in the Republic, a sovereignty they were denied after 1650. So speaking of William III, the hero of my story, I'm coming to him. Houthens later argued that, I quote, this is a really interesting quote, his sovereignty lay elsewhere. That is not in the Dutch Republic, but this elsewhere was no other than the Principality. And this elsewhere formed an essential asset in the territorial patrimony of the Orange family. It was not the only one. The Oranges had other domains in Germany, particularly in the Holy Roman Empire, but this really was the most important one. So it included fiscal revenues based on the toll rights that were applied to the goods that transited along the Rhone River. French occupations under Louis XIV, numerous and somewhat unbearable to William III, 1660-65, 1773-78 again, 85-97 again, and then 1702-1713, with two outcomes: loss of sovereignty, loss of income. And something that is forgotten is extremely important. One of the consequences of holding a title of sovereignty is that the Princes of Orange had a right of ennoblement. A number of families of the Principality were granted a title of nobility, and that applies to William III, in particular in the 1690s. So there was a power of patronage, if you want, that was very much the same as in, shall we say, traditional monarchies. This is a medal minted in 1649 after the effigy of William II, who was William III's father. What you see on the reverse of the medal is a cautious glorification of God only, soli Deo, honor et gloria, honor and glory to God only. Please make a note of the crown on top of the coat of arms, as well as the three fleurs de lis that was used as an emblem by the French kings since the Middle Ages. And I really want to stress here that legal writers emphasized the crown-like value of the title of the Prince of Orange. I'll be coming in greater detail to one of the great legal writers behind the defense of the title, the Orange's title of sovereignty, Joseph de la Pise, in his tableau historique. Les princes y paraissaient avec les qualités d'une grandeur royale, with the qualities of royal grandeur. So princes and / kings. Here is a comparison with the coat of arms of the City of Orange today. On the left, you see the blue wafer cone with the red ribbon. The three fleurs de lis have morphed into three oranges. I'll come back to this in a minute. And as a reminder, the Principality was definitively annexed to the Kingdom of France as a result of the Treaty of Utrecht in 1713. And after the Revolution, it became part of the Département du Vaucluse 99% of my compatriots don't know this story. They think that Orange has always been part of France. But in a sense, in their error, they are reconnecting with a legal argument that was made by the French crown at very early stages, that argued that the Principality, in fact, had always been part of the Kingdom of France. So it's an error in the sense that, you know, it was taken up by the Louis XIV's and Louis XIII's legal writers. Here is a medal minted in 1675 after the effigy of William II's son, William III. And I think that the timing is no accident. The same year he unsuccessfully sought to become Hertog von Helmond, that is Duke of Helmond, and was denied this title of sovereignty in the United Provinces because it was incompatible with their understanding of the location of sovereignty. Because of the opposition, as I write, of the provinces of Zeeland and Holland. And opposition was driven by a number of key cities, Delft, Amsterdam, Veere in Zeeland, where William was Marquis of Veere, but that was not enough to twist their arms, and they say, no, you can't be Duke of Helmond, that doesn't work in the Republic. And I think it's no accident that this medal should have been minted the same year. And no accident that the medal should have been minted at the time of the second occupation period by the Sun King between 73 and 78. So as a reminder, in 78, one of the outcomes of the negotiation of the Nijmegen Treaty was to return the Principality to William III, but only for a short time. Now, what I've done here is I've basically given you an idea of the broad chronology, the timeline, if you want. Now I want to run through the people really who ran the Principality on behalf of the family. And here I want to look at this in terms of what I describe as family clusters. And I'm not doing it.
No, but it's crazy.
Okay, so I draw a line between insiders, people who were the closest people to William III, and people who straddle the inside and the outside. I'm reasoning here in terms of family networks. Insiders, and I'm sorry if I'm I'm telling you a story that is familiar to you. I'll be very quick, of course. This on the left is his mother, Mary of Orange. She was Charles I's daughter, and Amalia von Solms, who was William III's grandmother, and the widow of Frederick Hendrik. It's a faction and somewhat dysfunctional family, to be frank, in which Mary, who dies very young in 1660, and Amalia, who dies very old, she's 72 when she dies, fight a very hard battle over William III's education. The reason being that his father died before he was born, 8 days before his birth. After the early death of William, the regency of the Principality is one of the many issues over which they disagree very strongly. And as the result of an agreement in 1672, the management of the affairs of the Principality was shared between his mother, 50%, and grandmother, and the Elector of Brandenburg, Frederick William. And following, originally the plan was for Mary only to be regent, but Amalia said, no, I'm the grandmother, I'm a very important person, I should have a say in this. And so the final agreement was we'll have a split between the different people of the family, and so basically it's 50% of the mother and grandmother and elector, 25-25. Your next question is, well, what happens when there's a disagreement? Well, there was theoretically a mediator to be appointed. The other important insider is probably one of the most famous figures of the Dutch Golden Age, Constantijn Huygens, secretary to 3 stadtholders as of 1625, a long life of service to the Orange family. He took special interest in the Principality of Orange, which he visited on a special occasion. I'll be coming to this extraordinary event in the spring of 1665, and he longed until very late in his life to be sent back to Orange. As late as 1679, he was 83. Moi qui ai encore depuis peu osé dire à mon maître, s'il avait encore besoin de mon service jusqu'à la mer Méditerranée, c'est-à-dire Orange, je m'y acheminerai gaiement et de grand cœur. That is, I really want to go back. I love it. Please send me back on a mission to the Principality. He backed Amalia, not the mother. in the struggle over the regency of the principality. And his argument was, it's a lovely, he was a man who loved proverbs. Ardientus audiam quam matrem amare. You always better love a grandmother than a mother. So he saw the principality as, interestingly enough, he was a man of extraordinary culture, of a confessional identity, somewhat similar to the county of Lingen, the Holy Roman Empire, where there was, since the early 17th century, an uneasy balance between Catholics and Protestants. So this is the close circles. Now, family cluster 2, I have people who are, and sort of straddle the inside and the outside, and I have on the one side a German connection and on the other an English connection. The German connection is basically this man, the elector of Brandenburg. I don't need to introduce him, I just want to reconnect the aspects of his life to my story. He married a daughter of Amalia von Salm in 1646. So my point that for William III, he's family. He's an uncle. And he battled against the exclusion of the Orange family between 1650 and 72, albeit with limited means. He was remotely involved in the discussions surrounding the Principality of Orange. He does write a number of letters about the Principality, but the key thing is that when William III dies without succession in 1702, the elector's son, now king, right? Prussia becomes a kingdom, as you know. The king, Frederick I of Prussia, was one of the many claimants to the independence of the Principality. But it didn't work. It was a man, a cousin of Louis XIV, Prince de Conti, who became Prince of Orange, but the effective ruler was Louis XIV. Frederick William bluntly described the French invasion of the Principality in 1660 as a case of factum Gallicum, the Gallic fact, right? That is the denial of law. And this is the other man who's part of the German connection. He was the governor. He was the executive, if you will, the man on the ground. His parents came from the Palatinates, like the von Salm's family, who were originally part of the retinue of Frederick V, the Elector Palatine, and his mother, Ursula von Salms-Braunfels, his father, Christopher, had been governor of the Principality. So they were really connected to the Orange family and had been for a long time. He was governor between 49 and 60. He's not a very likable man, to be frank, somewhat fickle and capricious and opportunistic, I find. He writes some memoirs that are highly unreliable because, as I say, I think he's somewhat of a self-serving public figure who toes a middle line between the people in power. Flees after 1665 and never comes back. Right, now just a quick word about the English connection. The point I'm making here is that there are two people to be borne in mind here. Charles II, he's the uncle of William III, and he's the brother of Mary of Orange, William's mother, right? He's the head of the English cluster around Mary of Orange and William. The Principality is not much on his radar during his reign. However, he is petitioned during the French occupation in 1660-65 by persecuted Protestants of Orange, and they appeal to him as défenseur de la foi, the title borne by the kings of England since the 1520s. This is the reference if you want to check. And one of the signatories of this petition of 1663 is a man called Sir Gabriel Sylvius, who followed Mary of Orange to London in 1660 and was to become a key link figure in the Orange-Stuart nexus. He's completely forgotten, I'd just like to say, but his name crops up in just about every letter when you start studying in detail the history of Anglo-Dutch relations. But he comes from Orange. And finally, of course, more famous Mary, who's, I just want to say, James on the left is her father, Charles's brother, who's King of England, as you know, between 85 and 88. He's not really interested in the Principality of Orange, but he seeks to mediate between Louis XIV and William III after the reoccupation of the Principality by French troops. He sends a diplomatic mission that is led by a Tory MP and diplomat called Sir William Trumbull. It fails. Trumbull is received by Colbert de Croissy, who argues on behalf of Louis XIV that, I'm sorry, this is not your place. The Prince of Orange, your protege, has no right of sovereignty over the Principality. My territory, my sovereignty. And not to be forgotten, on marrying William in 1677, James's daughter, Mary, who remains Protestant, becomes Princess of Orange, and she's celebrated by the citizens of Orange on the day of her marriage, as well as the day when she dies in 1694. Right, so this is it's my daughter who did this for me because I had trouble intersecting the two circles. I hope you like it. The point is that Orange is in the middle basically, but I don't think anyone's really noted that there's really a clash, a very powerful clash between two factions within the principality. Okay, so now I want to unpack, I suppose, a second aspect of my story by looking at Protestant master and Catholic servant. Here is William IV, William III, age 4, in a painting by Adrian Hannemann, who also painted his mother. Hannemann was a Haupen's protege, and here's my Spanish connection. This is Manuel is very familiar with Chies, of course. Sebastian Chies is a key figure in the history of Dutch-Spanish relations. He's originally a member of the Catholic patriciate of Orange. He travelled to Holland in the 60s, was a member of the Council of the Domains and Finances of William III, also an intendant of his possessions in Burgundy. Burgundy was annexed to the Kingdom of France in 1674 and was appointed an envoy of William III to the Spanish court in 70. He remained in office until his death in 79. Part of his mission was twofold. First, of course, foster the rapprochement that has been so finely described by Manuel in 2000 between the Dutch Republic and Spain. But the other thing that is sometimes forgotten is that there was also a feud, a rolling feud with a noble family from Brabant called Isenghem that dated back to the early 17th century, and they claimed a debt from the family of Orange, an unpaid debt, and basically the entire century they argued, "Hey guys, you owe us some money. Where's the money?" And the problem is that the Orange family was broke. So basically part of the mission of Dutch ambassadors to Madrid was to try and hammer out a deal between the Orange and the Isenghem family, and the Orange family hoped for the Spanish crown to intervene on their behalf, basically, and partly to cover their debt, asking the Spanish crown to, using the Spanish crown if you want as a sink fund. Part of his job for people who are interested in literature and music, and I know maybe some among you, is that he was also responsible for circulating musical manuscripts to the Netherlands, particularly to the Haupen's family, who was highly musical. This is now the Fafel family, so the Fafel archives is now available online. If you want to check that, I haven't pulled out something fake. It's not. This is a letter from Chies to the Grand Pensionary, who was William III's Prime Minister, if you want, between 72 and 68, 72 and 88. This is you probably can't see much here, but this is a lovely phrase where he says, "De cette manière la reine," that is Marianne of the Regent. She was like a Prime Minister. Sorry, it's very illegible here on the screen, but you have to trust me, that's what it says. And it's French. Chies, that's what he says after the occupation of and the annexation of Burgundy and Franche-Comté in 74. Le séjour d'Orange met en horreur. I hate to have to go back to Orange. And j'aimerais bien être condamné de passer des jours dans le Mont Jura. I'd rather be condemned to spend my days in Jura, that is east, the mountains, rather than being the everlasting spectator of the ruins of my homeland. This is a letter he writes to Haupen's in the spring of 74 after the annexation of Bourgogne, and this is a tentative sketch of his mental map along the Orange, Besançon, The Hague, Madrid line. My point really here to say, because it looks rather simple, is to say that this bit here, it's not really legible, but this bit here has been really left out of the picture. Now we know, thanks to the man here sitting on my left, we know a lot about this axis, but very little about this one, because it's not to be forgotten that the oranges have, of course, held domains here, but also in Burgundy, right? Ça va, il me reste combien de temps?
Encore quart d'heure.
Super. Now, I'd like to come to something a little more intellectual and look at the defenders of Orange's sovereign master. How do you defend a title of sovereignty? For this, you need to write, and to write something that is grounded in scholarship. This is really the Bible that was used throughout the early or modern times to defend the Orange's title of sovereignty over the Principality. It's a legal-political justification over the Principality of Orange. It's 1,000 pages long. It's very, very long, very fat, somewhat boring, but it's really interesting because it was used by other people afterwards. It starts with the antiquity and runs through the modern times. And interesting, it's a three-generation endeavor that begins in the late 16th century with a man called Jacques de Lapisse, who went to a monastery and assembled material and began writing about the history of the Principality in the light of his love for the Orange family. It was passed on to his son, who was assisted by his father in his research and writing in The Hague, and then by the following one, the third generation, a man called Gaspard, who died in 1666. Now, the original commissioner of the book was Philip William, the man I just mentioned above, the Catholic son of William the Silent, who resided in the Principality for 3 years in the early 17th century. The Principality had been confiscated by the French crown during the Wars of Religion by Charles IX, and the Bourbons argued that the Principality was not the Orange's property. No, they say very clearly it's originally they argue, part of the earldom of Provence, so it takes people back to the Middle Ages. And if you look at the collection of a French lawyer who worked with Louis XIII, his father called Pierre Dupuis, well, that's what he says. It can't be yours, this is part of the earldom of Provence. So it's a really litigious issue, and I think for me, it's a forgotten aspect of the war of devolution. We always speak of the Low Countries as the main factor for igniting the war between Louis and the rest of Europe, but I think this Principality, this small enclave, did play an important role. This is a man who illustrated the book you've just seen here, Crispin the Elder, who was founder of a printmaking family. And it's his son who is commissioned to illustrate Joseph de Lapille's history of the princes and Principality. He designed and engraved the frontispiece, and it's a book that was produced at the expense of Frederick Hendrik. You can see here, I don't know if it's really legible, but basically you have an envelope that refers to the Bow family, the Shaw family, all the families that were proprietors of the Principality before the Oranges. So the idea is to insist on what I would call a continuity argument. There's no break. It doesn't suddenly start with the Principality, with 1544. And this is another example of a defense, in a sense, of the title of sovereignty held by the Princes of Orange, a man called Rabon. Originally, he came from a Scottish Reformed family, and it's much inspired by de Lapille's magnum opus of 1639. Published, unsurprisingly, I think there's no accident, of course, at a time when the Principality was occupied by the French. Now, I want to now pause on a very special event. It's something I have an entire chapter in my forthcoming biography on this forgotten event. So, in 1665, just to introduce this brief snapshot picture on the crowning of 1665. The French king decides to seize the occupation, to put an end to the occupation of the Principality. This is Louis XIV on the left and Mazarin, his master. The targets regarding the Principality were twofold in 1660. Number one, secure the borders of the kingdom, and number two, freeze any further development of Protestantism across the southern border of the kingdom. There was a sizable Huguenot Protestant community in the neighbouring provinces of Languedoc and Dauphiné, and so sort of a lingering fear of contamination. The French ambassador to The Hague, a man called Dutou, saw the Principality as a hotbed of radical Republicans. He went a little far, but he was convinced that this was a weak spot, too close to the Kingdom of France. So the point not to be forgotten is that Louis XIV, when invading, when marching into the Principality, his target was not to become Prince of Orange. The best deal for him throughout this reign was for William III to become his protege, if you want, a good and nice little cousin who would do his every deed, not to be Prince of Orange on his behalf, and to pull down the fortifications that had been built in the 1620s. So here is an extraordinary event that occurred at the end of the French occupation in 1665. It's so this is called Haugens Triumph Orange, Haugens Triumph in Orange, on the 17th of May 1665, and it's the story of a crowning ceremony. There are two poems, you can't read them of course because they're really illegible from here, by a poet and playwright called Jan Vos. And Haugens sits in the middle on the centre stage, between the members of the Parliament of Orange. La principauté had argued Haugens in the 1650s, is sa couronne. The Principality is talking about William III, it's his crown. And par conséquent, and so, the honour of his house. The Principality, when it was returned to the Dutch Republic, that is to William III, William was 15. The celebrations unfolded in absentia principis, that is, it's his mentor, Haugens, who travelled to the Principality to preside over the ceremony on the behalf of his protege. This is him, again, the main hero of my story here. He resides in the Principality in the spring, and he had argued that it was crucial for this to happen because without the Principality, the Oranges would be little more than imperial earls. Without the Principality, or not much really, not much, a sort of a low-key German prince. So, you'll have to believe me, this is a translation of the inauguration of the inhuldiging Oranje Wilms erg begint weer adem te halen. So this is a hymn to William III as peacemaker, kind of Augustan figure after 5 painful years of French occupation. Orange, I'll read the English translation, William's inheritance begins to breathe again. Now that the lawful head commands the obedience of his state, a freeborn prince also requires free subjects. Never must the sun of his happiness, which now rises, be splattered by the war of civil blood and tears. He who has the Principality from God is fit only for peace. And this is a remarkable pamphlet that was published on the occasion by a pastor, a minister of the Protestant church called Jacques Pinoton de Chambrin, who tells the story of the re-establishment of the Principality of Orange, the resumption of the Principality of Orange. Pinoton de Chambrin was to become later Mary of Orange's chaplain, her personal chaplain. And he begins his life here, and that's what made him famous. And in the Chambrin narrative, I'm nearing the end, is addressed to William's grandmother, Amalia von Solms. It tells a graphic story, graphic details the story of a legitimate prince, un prince légitime, qui remonte sur le trône, who reascends the throne, as if he'd always been sitting on this throne. This is her, age 32, by Bourbon, and this has not been stolen. Probably I'll conclude here because otherwise, yes, I'm nearly there. The crowd here swears an oath of allegiance to the Prince of Orange after passing an amnesty, and the oath swearing ceremony that unfolds in 1665 on this crowning ceremony is followed by a vision. I'll translate from the French. revit en l'air une couronne. A crown was seen in the air, which had just come to rest on the throne set up for the prince. There's something extraordinary about the fact that at the very moment when the prince is giving thanks to his subjects and receiving a new oath of loyalty, a crown appears on his throne. So my questions maybe to trigger discussion now that I'm closing. Was William III the want of being sovereign in the Republic, King of Orange? And more to the point, was Amalia co-sovereign of Orange? If you remember what happened in 1689, they're co-sovereigns, not just one. My argument is that Amalia here is co-sovereign of the principality. And I just want to conclude by saying that this ceremonies probably served as a template for what came here in 1672, when William III was appointed Captain General in late February 1672. I'm afraid the image is a little blurry, but what you can see here, the banquet was a rather lavish banquet was organised in The Hague, and what you see here is that all the people who were invited, members of the regents of the Republic, and here on top is a crown. In a republic that denies, as you know, royalties in the Abjuration Act of 1650 anyway. I'm done.
Thanks.